Welcome to Women's Wisdom, a series on sensuality, sexuality, love, power, and other issues that support the honoring and empowerment of women's experience in the world now and into the future. The inspiration for this series and the topics themselves were raised by you, the women we've met while touring the country, leading women's circles and conversations. There were so many overlaps in the concerns and narratives women shared that we wanted to bring dialogue out into the open. Rosebud Woman is a family-owned company that is all about reverent, intimate wellness for all stages of a woman's life. We are dedicated to bringing more joy and reducing suffering in minds, hearts, bodies, and culture around the female experience. Consider this series as our gift to you. Hello. Welcome to Women's Wisdom, brought to you by Rosebud Woman. I'm Lisa Betts-LaCroix, and I'll be your host for today and for all of the episodes coming up. Today, we will be talking about 3,000 days bleeding, period basics, new knowledge, normalizing the conversation, and talking with our daughters. Hera is known as the goddess of women's fertility and the patron of menstruation. And in ancient times, menstruation was viewed as a sacred and a visionary time when women whose cycles then were often synchronized retreated to quiet spaces in honor of the time that was known to be more emotionally sensitive than usual. And then they returned to their communities, renewed and re-inspired. Now, that is not the most common experience women today usually enjoy. And in fact, menstruation is sometimes referred to as the curse, and it's often accompanied by shame, dread, and discomfort. Our guest today is on a mission to help women reclaim their hormonal health and vitality. But before we welcome Nicole Jardim, please, I'd like to remind you that we welcome your questions and your comments. So please feel free to chat, to make comments. In the chat window, you can also offer your questions up for Nicole to answer. Nothing's off limits. You can just put them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So now, our guest expert today is women's health and functional nutrition coach with a specialty in hormones and reproductive health. I'd like to welcome to Women's Wisdom, Nicole Jardim. There we go.
I was a little worried there for a second. Anyways, thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Oh, well, welcome. I'm so glad that you were able to take the time out. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because I know there's so much, like I said, shame and difficulty and pain, and some of it's physical and some of it's emotional, and a lot of it's cultural. So I'm wondering if, by way of introduction, if you could share your own personal hormonal journey and how your experience as a teenager led you to do the work you're doing right now.
Yes, I had a very tumultuous experience with my period as a teenager. And it was one of these things that drove me to do the work that I do because I really, really struggled. I had terribly heavy, painful periods from the time I was really young, probably like 14 or so. And they just continued to get worse. And then I started to notice that they would come every 3 or 4 months. And at first I thought that was a bit of a blessing, and then realized that it was becoming a bit of a problem, especially when they would finally come. They came with a vengeance. They were super heavy, super painful, and they just kept getting worse, like I said. So eventually I went and saw my gynecologist, and she immediately wrote a prescription for the pill. And that was really what set me on the path to trying to address my period problems, although that did not really help. Initially it did. And then, of course, I ran into all kinds of other problems because there were a lot of side effects, including chronic urinary tract infections and yeast infections and horrible hair loss and melasma on my face. And I put on weight and I started developing joint pain and gut health issues. It was just I was like a poster child for period problems or pill problems. And so eventually I hit my limit where I had gotten a urinary tract infection medication that I was allergic to and ended up in the ER with a major allergic reaction. And that was my last straw. And so I saw an acupuncturist who offered to help me figure out this whole thing. And he said immediately that he felt that the pill had something to do with it. And I was so shocked nobody had ever said that to me. And so that really was a catalyst for my healing. And I started seeing him consistently. I changed my diet. I went to Whole Foods for the first time. I mean, all these things happened. And it really was that impetus to, or that was the impetus to go into doing this work. Because I had studied film production. I worked in TV and commercials. This was not my plan in life. And over time, I realized that I'd been able to help myself have a period that was no big deal. And I felt that there were other women who could benefit from what I was sharing too. So I studied to be a certified health coach and then a women's health coach. And I tried to learn everything I could on hormonal health and periods. And here I am today.
Wonderful. Well, you describe yourself as a happy hormone guide. And
Yes.
I love that. That's so cute, but, and important, just catchy. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how people can become period literate, how they can be a detective and recognize whether their periods are normal or if they're problematic.
Yeah, I think that what we first need to understand is that your period and your entire menstrual cycle, for that matter, is a barometer of your health. It really does help you figure out, what could be going on with your overall health, like what's happening with your mental and emotional health, your adrenal glands, your thyroid. I mean, your period can tell you all of that. And yet we don't even realize that. In our culture, we're sort of told to sort of like medicate away our periods or to just ignore them or ignore the pain or the symptoms that we're experiencing. And so with all of that said, what I always recommend to women is to start with the basics, start with tracking the symptoms that are associated with your cycle. And from there, you're going to develop such an incredible understanding of your unique body, your hormonal landscape, your menstrual cycle, and nobody's gonna be able to take that away from you. And you'll be able to have educated conversations with your doctor, with any healthcare provider about, the data that you've gleaned from tracking your cycle. And so when I say that, what I mean is getting a period tracking app or getting a cycle tracking workshop, which, you can buy those on Amazon, and, basically workbook, not workshop. So anyway, the point is that, you want to be tracking from, the first day of your cycle is the first day of your period. So the first day of bleeding, and you want to track how many days you're bleeding, how long, how many days, how much you're bleeding. So in that sense, tracking how many times you're changing tampons or pads or your menstrual cup or period underwear, whatever protection you use. And from there, you want to be thinking about your menstrual symptoms as they relate to your mental and emotional health. Like, do you feel completely wiped out by your period? In the lead up to your period, do you feel like your emotions are completely out of control and you're super frustrated, angry, lashing out at people, or you feel really depressed? Some women describe a mini depression. Again, all of those symptoms are symptoms to be tracked. And then in addition to that, once your period is over, are you ovulating? Because that's really the key. Ovulation is truly a sign of health. And if we are to have a healthy menstrual cycle, we have to be ovulating consistently. And so to determine whether you're ovulating, one of the ways I do this with tracking your cycle is taking your basal body temperature, which is your temperature upon awakening. And so that will tell you whether you've ovulated or not, because your temperature is actually lower in the first half of your cycle, and then it rises in the second half. And then in addition to that, you can track your cervical fluid, which is another really key important indicator of your fertility. And so if you are ovulating, your cervical fluid follows a very distinct pattern. It actually starts out dry right after your period and then starts to progressively get wetter and wetter until the point where right before ovulation, it's a little bit stretchy. You'll notice it feeling like egg white or, like kind of viscous like, and it can stretch between your fingers. And so that will indicate to you that ovulation is imminent. And then after that, after ovulation occurs, then your cervical fluid dries up and it pretty much remains that way for the rest of your cycle. So we're really seeing a lot of patterns in the way our bodies show up. And it's just a matter of us paying attention to them, which we've never really been taught to do.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. That's a great guide to how to start tracking. And seems to me that any kind of knowledge is power, and it's great to have that kind of history so you can refer back to it. Even if you don't necessarily need it right now, you might need it sometime in the future, right?
Yes, definitely.
So I want
Yeah.
to take a pause for a second just to invite our attendees. You're here for some reason, and we'd love to know what it is that you're most interested in. So if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A box below so we can try to get to them, and so we can really make sure that Nicole's answering to the concerns that are most important to you. So
Absolutely.
Nicole, we were just hearing about how to track and what that might impact and some of the difficulties that people might experience. Are those symptoms you described indicative of a hormone imbalance?
Yeah. So what I would say when it comes to hormone imbalance, first of all, I think hormones have gotten a really bad rap. And, we are at the point where, when we talk about hormones, we don't talk about them in a positive way at all, right? We talk about hormones as being sort of the bane of our existence. Like, hormones mean really bad menopause, or they mean terrible raging PMS moods, or they mean heavy periods or painful periods, or they mean PMS or something like that. And I've never really, all the research I did for my Fix Your Period program, I never really heard women talk about hormones in a positive way, like they were actually the life-giving chemical messengers that they are, because that's really what they are. And they're responsible for basically 99% of what's happening in your body at any given moment. And yet we don't even recognize the importance of them, let alone like what they're capable of doing. And so I really feel like hormones need a bit of a rebrand. And in talking about, what your hormones do for you, they're responsible for so much. Like I said, your entire menstrual cycle, your response to stress, whether you're hungry or you're full, or whether you're exhausted or you're happy or you're sad. I mean, they're really behind it all. And so with that said, when it comes to signs of a hormonal imbalance, I think it's important to know which hormones we're talking about, because it's confusing for women. I feel like hormonal imbalance is a bit of an abstract term that nobody really gets. Like, they kind of understand, if they have a period problem, for instance, or, they have a mood issue, but they don't really get it. And so when it comes to hormones in general, I always ask women to think of them in sort of a tiered fashion. So the top hormones at the top of this tier is cortisol and insulin. And then those are followed by DHEA and pregnenolone. And then below that, we have estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, melatonin, these hormones that are really influenced by the hormones on the top. And so when we're talking about a hormonal imbalance as it relates to your menstrual cycle, a lot of the time what we find is estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, those are the ones that are imbalanced. And those are often imbalanced because you have stress that you're not dealing with, and cortisol is out of control, and it's caused a trickle-down effect to your sex hormones. And so if you have sex hormone imbalance, typically what you see is a menstrual cycle problem. So you might have heavy periods, or you might not have a period at all because you're not ovulating. If you don't ovulate, you don't actually have a period. You may have irregular cycles, and that might mean you have too high testosterone. So your cycles are way too high, or your cycles are just way too long. So there's multiple things.
So given that this isn't something that's standardly tested, as far as my own personal experience,
yeah,
what are the ways that people can learn about their hormones and the various levels that they're experiencing? Is it something that they would only go and test if they were having extreme problems, or is there another way to
well, I think hormone testing is sort of like the gold standard. I mean, we really want to know what's going on. Like, we want to have a baseline. And so I consider hormone testing to be something that we should do at some point or another. It just really depends on the severity of your problem and how long you've been dealing with it for. For instance, if you're not ovulating and you're not getting a period, you want to test to figure out why that might be, because there are multiple reasons for it. I don't know that people even really realize this, but if you have celiac disease that's undiagnosed, it might show up as a missing period. I mean, you might just have very irregular cycles or no period at all. Or you might have something called a pituitary tumor that raises your prolactin levels, and prolactin suppresses ovulation and a period. So there are, multiple reasons why you might have something like that. So at the end of the day, what I think is really crucial is to, like I said, track your cycle, pay attention to your symptoms. You become the expert on your body, and then you can start to figure out, where the imbalances lie. And then the second thing is that Hormone testing it's done when you have an issue. So like I said, if you don't have a period or you have extremely irregular periods, so you might have polycystic ovary syndrome, or you have a really, really heavy period, you might want to test for certain sex hormones, but you might also want to test for a bleeding disorder like Wilson's disease. So, there are multiple ways to test. And in fact, I laid all of this out in my book, Fix Your Period, because I really feel so strongly that we need to be able to advocate for ourselves. And like you just said, in your experience, hormone testing has not been something that's really readily offered. And I find that a lot of women just need to go out on their own and do the hormone testing and work with a practitioner who's willing to look at the tests and interpret them. So when it comes to testing your hormones that are involved with your menstrual cycle, you want to be looking at estradiol, which is the most common form of estrogen during your cycling years. You want to look at progesterone. You want to look at testosterone, and DHEA, which is I can never say the whole word out loud because it's too long and complicated and I can never get it right. But DHEA is the hormone that, basically it's the hormone that keeps cortisol in check a little bit. It's released by your adrenal glands, but it's also an androgen. And so it can potentially cause, menstrual cycle issues. So those are the hormones to test.
Great. So that's the perfect segue into, we have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask you. And the first one that's very related to that is, well, you already answered to some degree where someone would start. That's part of the question. And this attendee says that she's been to her doctor and they've tested hormones and thyroid, but they don't seem to be very comprehensive. So where exactly does one go to get hormone testing?
Yeah, I know this is really challenging. And I think, I see this so often where women are, they go to their doctor, they get sort of basic testing, and then they're usually told that the test results are normal and they're sent on their way. And, and what happens is when they come work with me, I look at these test results, and I'm not a doctor. I don't interpret test results, but I can look at them and kind of gauge based on my own training, what I consider to be normal or not normal. And again, when you sync them up to the person's symptoms, it makes a lot of sense. So my interpretation of test results is a little bit different to the conventional medicine interpretation. And what that means is I look at it from a functional medicine perspective, which is my training background. And that's really looking at test results from the perspective that, we're not looking at them from, a sick person's test results. We're looking at them in terms of health. And so really what, I want to do is keep a person in a healthy range. And so the functional test results or the functional ranges of test results are quite different to conventional medicine. So that's the first issue that a lot of women run into, is that they're normal and yet their symptoms are not. And so I just feel like if you're going to a doctor who is basically telling you that you're fine and you should just go about your business, that to me is like medical gaslighting. It just means that you're not being listened to, your symptoms are you're not being heard, and your symptoms are not being taken seriously because your test results are coming back quote unquote normal. So what I would suggest is you can work with someone like me. I will do the deep work, and because that's the work that I do, or, work with like women's health coach like me, a nutritional therapist, another type of health coach, someone who is going to dig deeper. Yes, like exactly. A functional medicine doctor, a naturopathic doctor, anyone who is going to take a full body holistic approach to your health. So that would be my suggestion. And you can bring all of those test results to that person too, and they can look at it, but they can look at it through the lens of, well, we want you to be well. We're not going to base it on sick people ranges, basically.
Perfect. So another question is, that how many women you've seen that have with hormonal balances are due to thyroid issues like hypothyroidism?
Yeah, I see that she wrote hyperthyroidism, which is not as common as hypothyroidism. Yes, like 1 million. And again, this comes back to this idea that your hormones are all impacted by other hormones that are higher up on the totem pole, basically. And so when it comes to thyroid, people don't realize that your thyroid is intricately connected with your menstrual cycle. And so when it comes to thyroid health, it has to be working well in order for your ovaries to work well, technically. And the reason I say that is because your thyroid, it plays a role in your ovarian function. And so if your thyroid isn't working properly, you don't make your body doesn't make as much progesterone as it should. So that's like one of the big issues. Thyroidism or hypothyroidism or thyroid dysfunction in general also slows down ovulation. So what that means is if you're not ovulating, you're not going to get a period. You're going to have menstrual cycle problems. And the reason thyroid does that is because your thyroid is basically your body's energy generator, right? So it's responsible for your metabolism, for your body temperature, a whole host of things, your weight, all of it. And when it's not working properly, it definitely impacts your ovarian function. So it can cause, like I said, this lack of ovulation. It can predispose us to estrogen dominance, where, we don't have as much progesterone in relation to our estrogen, and it can cause a whole host of other issues. So that's why, I really recommend that if you are dealing with a thyroid problem, you've got to work with someone who is not a conventionally minded doctor, because they're really only going to test TSH and maybe free T4 if you're lucky. And their whole perspective is TSH basically, or high TSH means that your thyroid is underactive, and low TSH means that your thyroid is overactive. And that's really it. But your thyroid is multifaceted, and there are much more hormones that the thyroid makes. So I highly recommend working again with someone who I was just describing, like someone like me or a functional practitioner of some kind, naturopath, someone who's going to look at the bigger picture.
Great.
Yeah.
One other question related to hormones and to ovulation is that infertility that's so much more likely to be occurring as we get older. Is it related to ovulating or not ovulating? Part of the problem, I think, is the question.
I see the question here, and it's a really good question. And this is what I think is so unfortunate, is that we're not taught this information at all. And we should, because this is basic, periods 101, really, at the end of the day, and fertility 101. And so when we're struggling with infertility, it's so multifaceted. And I think that that's something that's really important for all of us to understand. It is related to not ovulating in many cases, because if you cannot or do not ovulate, you cannot get pregnant. It's impossible. It's virtually impossible, because you need that egg to leave your ovary and sit in your fallopian tube and wait for a sperm cell to, fertilize it. And then that fertilized egg goes and sits in your uterine lining, and then it will implant and, you'll have a baby. So the point is that if we are not ovulating, we need to figure out why that is, right? So like I said, ovulation is a sign of health. And so if you're ovulating consistently, that indicates to me that your endocrine system is working properly, your immune system is working properly, and your body in general is overall healthy. And so if you're not ovulating, to me, that indicates that there's possibly a nutrition deficiency or nutrient deficiency. It could mean that you're way too stressed. People don't realize this, right? We have a lot of axes in our body, throughout our bodies. They all start in our brain with our hypothalamus and our pituitary glands. And those glands are releasing hormones that instruct our thyroid, our adrenals, our ovaries, our pancreas, all of these endocrine glands to do their jobs. And so if we have a disruption in our hypothalamus and our pituitary, in the case of excess stress, which who doesn't have that, then we run into problems. So that excess cortisol that we produce, it actually kind of hijacks our brain and makes it produce less follicle stimulating hormone, which would stimulate your ovaries to produce an egg, or to get an egg ready for ovulation. So if you're already hijacked in your brain and your ovaries are not getting the message, your whole ovulatory system stops. So your menstrual cycle kind of comes to a halt, and you might not have a period, or you might have very irregular cycles, or you might just bleed constantly. I mean, it just looks different for different people. So we have to figure out what's causing this ovulatory disturbance, and thus, the infertility. So like I said, we've got stress, we've got nutrient deficiencies, we've got thyroid problems. Like I just said, that impacts your ovulation as well. We have multiple things, environmental toxins. I mean, this is huge. And then we also have sperm. Sperm is not doing so great either right now. In addition to women's bodies, men's bodies are really struggling as well. And so it's really critical for us to understand that sperm plays a huge role in this. It's not all a woman. And we need to be checking out sperm as a very first step, and also not taking, same as for us women, seeing a functional doctor or a naturopath or someone who is holistically minded. You want to take those sperm results or sperm test results to one of those people as well, because those sperm parameters, by the way, they keep getting lower and lower. And as a result, we're lowering the bar for men's sperm quality and not getting pregnant because of it. It's incredible to me how many women go through IVF because of poor sperm quality. And instead of just working on the man's sperm quality, which is highly influenced by nutrition and lifestyle and all kinds of other factors, then we go through a very invasive procedure that is, to me, is very invasive and serious. And, and it takes a huge toll on our bodies. So I think that, there's multiple aspects to infertility.
Okay, that's really shocking and a really amazing point, and somewhat illustrative of what happens so often in our culture, where we don't necessarily look into all the details, but we place, I guess, the emphasis or the not the blame, but the power on just one place, where we don't actually look at the whole holistic picture. So
the onus is on women. Yeah, 100%.
So men can be going through, or partners together, if they're trying to get pregnant and dealing in infertility, can be looking holistically from both the sperm side and the ovulation fertility, women's fertility side. Great information. So
Definitely.
You have a program that you have a 6-week program, and I know that you call it 6 weeks to fix your period, right? Or it's
that's in my book, actually. Yes. Yeah. I have an actual program itself called Fix Your Period too. And, that's more of a 3-month program because, again, that's, usually how long it takes for women to start to see changes in their ovulatory cycles and their menstrual cycles in general. But yes, in my book, it is 6 weeks to, fix your period technically. Yeah. Right. So I had to fit it into a book.
Okay. And then you probably already covered this, but you talk about being a menstruation maven. Can you just talk, is that basically what you're talking about right now? It's like having the knowledge and being empowered and knowing what's involved and understanding your body. And is that what's involved, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah. That is the foundation of it. And we came up with that tagline as, almost as kind of a joke. And I've run it by so many people over the years, and some women are just like, hell no, Nicole, I am not going to be any menstruation maven. I have no interest in this. I just want to deal with the period problems and get on with my life. And then others completely embrace it. They become health coaches. They're just so psyched about their menstrual cycle. And that's really what it is to really fall in love with your period. And it doesn't have to be this terrible thing. It doesn't have to be mysterious. It does not have to be gross or yuck or whatever. I've heard all the things at this point. It does not have to be the bane of your existence. It can be what I consider to be a guiding force in your life. And when I say that, what I mean is, not only is it your period, but we're talking about your, the follicular phase, the ovulatory phase, the luteal phase. There's all these phases of your cycle, and your hormones are shifting quite dramatically throughout these phases. So almost every week of your cycle. And what you can do is start to really live in harmony with those phases, meaning that, in the luteal phase, for instance, as you're getting closer to your period, maybe you're winding down a little bit. Maybe you don't feel like hanging out with a whole lot of people. Maybe you don't throw yourself a birthday party 3 days before you're getting your period, or you don't go on a date 3 days before you're getting your period. Instead, maybe you take some time alone. So there are multiple ways that we can really start to, harness these powers of our cycle. And that's really what I consider to be a menstruation maven.
Lovely. Yeah. It sounds like what you're talking about is really getting a lot more in sync with our natural cycles and the aspect and the impact that the cycles the point in our cycle has on us in terms of emotionally and socially, and just to really be more in touch with really ourselves.
Oh gosh, absolutely. Yeah. And sexually as well. I mean, there are some, I think that women generally expect to have the same energy, the same appetite, the same sex drive, the same everything throughout the month. And that's really sort of like a very male way of approaching the world, very masculine way of approaching the world. It's not how we do it. It's not how our bodies are designed. We have this hormonal ebb and flow happening throughout our cycle. And if we can really get to know that our unique hormonal landscape, we can really tune into what we actually need in each phase of our cycle, so that we're not, raging PMS monsters at the end of our, in the lead up to our period, or, we're able to capitalize on our heightened brain skills when we're ovulating, when estrogen and testosterone are super high. And, we have great verbal skills, and we can step up in meetings or, take charge of projects. Like, we have a lot more confidence at that time in our cycle. So how do we maximize those strengths?
The thing that I hear in that is something that is in general rising up in our culture right now, which is the more we actually connect with the reality and then the truth of our feminine nature and power in the ways that we've been dislocated from and disassociated from, the more we can actually be impactful and happy and joyful and live really, lives that can really make a difference. Like, it impacts everything.
Doesn't it though? I love that. I love that you said that. I completely agree. I think it's certainly reflective in society overall right now, especially because, periods have sort of come out of hiding, so to speak. And, we're really more openly talking about them. We're speaking about these issues that we experience. I feel like women are speaking more about their IVF experiences. They're speaking about postpartum depression and anxiety and how debilitating that is. I feel like the veil has been lifted to a degree.
Yeah, well said. I really appreciate that the veil has been lifted, and it's lifting all the time, and it's offers so much ability to dispel the things that are associated with shame, which is actually one of the things I wanted to talk about, because you referenced it implicitly, and I recommend in the introduction, and other people as we were leading up to this episode mentioned that that's something they've experienced in their life. And then I also want to talk about how we go about speaking to our daughters about menstruation. And I think one of the historical aspects to menstruation has been so laden with shame, and no one, like I say, has told any stories or mentioned anything about that. But can you address that and how you help in your work, either daughters or mothers of daughters, get more clear about how to address the shame that surrounds so much of this historically?
Yes. First of all, sorry, there seems to be a lawnmower and a dog barking. It's like all the things are happening in the background right now that I was not anticipating. So sorry, ladies. But anyway, what I have found more than anything, it's sort of like in the words of, I'm paraphrasing too, with Brené Brown, and this idea of just speaking about it, bringing it into the light continually. That's how we end shame and stigma. And that's really been my mission, obviously. That's all I do all day long, talk about this stuff. And that's really what we have to do as mothers to daughters and to sons as well, to anyone who is menstruating or not menstruating. It's, I think that this is a universal topic that needs to be talked about and completely normalized. And what I found is that, a lot of my friends are moms now. I'm not a mom yet. And and they have talked to me about, how do I talk to my son or my daughter? Because everyone wants to talk to everybody about it now, which is great. And, they've all remarked to me that if they take a completely neutral tone and they happen to mention it, or their child asks about it. Like, for instance, my friend, her son asked her about her tampon string the other day, and he's 4. And so she explained it, in very basic terms, what that is, what women get every month. And, it was amazing because she said, oh, he was like, okay, that's cool, and moved on. And that's really what it is, right? If we don't attach our own stuff to it, our kids won't attach stuff to it either. So that's really what it comes down to. Like, how can we just put our stuff aside? Because gosh, there is so much conditioning. I know, because I grew up with it, but if we could just take a moment and put that aside and talk to them about it from the time they ask as little children, they'll know. I mean, it'll be ingrained in the fabric of who they are by the time they're 12, 13, 15, because they've been talking about this without any kind of weirdness for 10 years.
Absolutely. So there is a question I want to address that's basically around pads, natural pads or otherwise. Is there a benefit to natural pads and reusable cotton pads?
That's such a good question. I have not answered that question in so long, but yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I highly recommend switching and moving as far away from possible as, from conventional pads and tampons, because they are, first of all, they're bleached, and the byproduct of that bleach is dioxin, which is a very potent chemical that can cause all kinds of problems. Not to mention the fact that your vaginal tissue is pretty much the most absorbent tissue in your body. So we really don't want to be putting anything in there that can, leach chemicals into your bloodstream. That's why, a lot of women report to me that when they switch to natural pads or, cotton only pads, organic cotton, or they do a menstrual cup or period underwear, they notice that their periods become a lot less heavy. And the reason for that is likely that the chemicals that are in these products are highly estrogenic. So we live in a very estrogenic society now, where a lot of the pesticides and a lot of pesticides that are sprayed on cotton, and a lot of the chemicals, generally speaking, are very estrogen. They create a lot of estrogen dominance. They're xenoestrogens, they're estrogen mimickers. And so they create this situation in our bodies where we have this heightened estrogen in relation to our progesterone. And we can't test for it because we can't test xenoestrogens. We can't test these fake estrogens to know. And you will notice a difference, like heavier periods, more PMS, more period pain, things like that, breast tenderness, breast pain. Those are the symptoms that we might experience with a situation like that. So definitely consider switching. Huge changes can happen.
Great to know. Thank you for that question to our attendee. And thank you for all of our attendees for questions. We still have a few more to get to.
Yeah, they're so good. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have other questions, please pop them in the box. We're going to get to as many as we possibly can. And the next one that I want to address from an attendee is a really amazing question, which is, do men also have a cycle like our period where their energy shifts in a way like ours does? Like how during ovulation, our sexual desire can grow. Is there any similar cycle like that for men?
Oh, I love that so much. That's so good. Okay. I'm just going to say, ladies, that our bodies are kind of amazing. I mean, what they do on a monthly basis is so incredible. Guys don't even have anything close to that. We're so lucky. We're so lucky. They literally are so boring. It's like literally in the morning, cortisol rises for men, testosterone rises, and then they slowly taper off throughout the day. And that's it. And then they go to bed and they do it all over again. And that's all they have. They really don't have any kind of cyclical shift besides what happens through a 24-hour cycle. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. They're just not as cool as us. Yeah. So that's really that's it. And that's why, it's so interesting. We tend to be up at night a lot of the time. Like we get a second wind. Men typically don't get a second wind. Like when they're done, they're done. Their testosterone is all the way down at the bottom in the nighttime. It's also nature's kind of cruel joke because their testosterone is high. Their sex drive tends to be a lot higher in the mornings, whereas ours tends to be higher in the evenings. And that just is the nature of it. But yes, in terms of like your sex drive, at ovulation time, which is, tends to be your peak for the most part. Men don't have that in the month, just in the morning.
No, I mean, just having that information is helpful, right? Just recognizing that our cycles are operating on different like oscillations can help us have maybe more compassion for each other and more compassion for ourselves and for men as we try to like find the ways that we sync up together.
Yes, absolutely. I know. I completely agree with that.
So another attendee says that a lot of women talk about period and symptom changes between their period and perimenopause, and wants you to talk about the hormonal changes for perimenopause and what you see with women in that stage of life, or why women feel I'm just not that old. And
right. This is so great. Oh my gosh. These questions are incredible. You guys are amazing. There is a significant shift and it makes sense. That's what should happen. I mean, we have these different phases, very distinct phases in our menstrual life cycle, right? We've got puberty where you go from not having an ovulatory cycle to having an ovulatory cycle. It's kind of incredible actually that we go from basically doing nothing with our bodies to releasing an egg every single month and then having a period and all of this. This is a big deal for our bodies. And then we go through the teenage years, which tend to be a little tumultuous. And then our 20s, things calm down a little bit. They don't tend to be as crazy as our teens. And then the 30s, things definitely start to shift. And so what I see is for the most part, periods tend to get a little heavier, especially after childbirth. I found that as well with a lot of my clients and a lot of my friends, because I ask everyone about their period. And usually they have heavier periods that come more frequently, which tends to be the case with an estrogen dominant situation or when you're not ovulating as often as you might be, just on a regular monthly cycle. And so that is a shift I tend to see in the 30s. And then what I found is that there is no cliff that we fall off into hormonal purgatory, and menopause hell, at 35 or even at 40, because I just turned 40 and I've not really seen any changes so far, but I've been taking care of things for a long time. So this is why I always tell women that you want to be taking care of your health when you're in your late teens. In your early teens, you get a pass. But in your late teens, your early 20s, your 30s, because all of this adds up. Because what we don't realize is that when your ovaries shut down for business in your mid to late 40s or early 50s for some of us, what happens is your adrenals take over. They take over responsibility for producing some of your sex hormones. They're not going to produce as much as your ovaries did, but they do. And if your adrenals are completely burnt out, as most of ours are, unfortunately, because life is life and modern living is intense, what ends up happening is we have a more pronounced perimenopause or menopause transition. When I say pronounced, I say that nicely. It's more catastrophic for some women, and they have like a complete hormonal breakdown. And so I really encourage women to try and avoid that, and really taking care of your adrenal glands is a good first step, but also taking care of your health in general. And so when it comes to this perimenopause shift, what I see is like in the early to mid 40s, that's where I start to see changes. And so usually what you might notice is you skip a period, you don't ovulate. So you might skip a few periods in a year, or you get a period or you get multiple periods and they are much heavier. Because again, you're lacking that progesterone that you would have been making more consistently in your 20s and 30s. So those are the symptoms that I tend to see. And of course, there's the mental and emotional side of things too, because things shift, right? Usually in our 40s, life is intense. I mean, we're raising children. Most of us are at like peak career time. We've got relationships going. We've got a lot of responsibilities. And so I found that, there tends to be a lot of burnout. And so we really have to check that as it relates to our perimenopause symptoms.
So let me ask you then about the next stage, once people are through menopause. I've been hearing a lot of talk recently about various new approaches to dealing with menopause and to doing various new kinds of hormone replacement therapy. And some of them seem really controversial and really extreme, but I'm hearing and reading very mixed things about it, to the point where some of the people who are doing pretty extreme hormone replacement that hasn't been like tested by the medical field, where people they're actually seeing it's a positive thing to get their period restated. I'm guessing that's a pretty controversial area and pretty involved.
So controversial.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I get that it's super controversial, but I guess the piece that strikes me in that is that there is still so much to learn about hormones, and so much more reclaiming for all of us to do around the choices that we make around around hormones. Yeah. And I'm wondering if there's anything you can say to people who may be, already through menopause. Is it basically like, there you go, you're done, might as well get used to it, your body's complete? Or what is a program for health and vitality and sensuality and sexuality and being alive in menopause look like from a hormonal perspective?
I have found that, I haven't found, it's a very clearly obvious to me that our society is so obsessed with anti-aging and this idea of reversal of aging. And I don't know, man, that has got to shift, because menopause is just what happens. Keeping your ovaries going, that is highly experimental. And I can't even imagine the potential health effects that something like that could have. And, a lot of people say that, you're going to keep cycling and you get your ovaries and you get your hormones and all that good stuff. But your bodies have evolved over millions of years. The fact that we're just a little blip on the radar and we're now messing with this evolution of a woman's body is a little scary. But
can I rephrase it then a little bit more moderately then? Maybe not to that extent, but just what are your thoughts on hormone replacement therapy for optimization? Because at some point, if we're wanting to optimize, you're basically saying we can optimize our experience. There must be a way that's more moderate that we could optimize our experience with our hormone relationship and interactions.
Yeah, certainly. And, I'm not, because I can't prescribe hormones or anything like that, I don't consider myself to be any kind of major hormone replacement therapy expert. But the people who I do talk to who are big proponents of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. And, I've seen amazing things happen for women where, they were having horribly painful sex, or, their moods were completely crashed, or they were having issues with their skin. There were like hair loss, all kinds of issues were happening. And then they did go on hormone replacement therapy and things completely turned around. So I'm a big fan of it if you're working with a practitioner and, they're really skilled and trained in that specific area. But yes, absolutely. You can 100% optimize your health in your late 40s, 50s, 60s with bioidenticals. I'm a big fan of them for sure.
And then would that be the same approach, going through the same type of, you specialize in younger women generally, but it would also be going through a functional integrative kind of health practitioner?
Yeah, definitely. And someone who is recognized for their work in bioidenticals. I think that you really want to make sure that they're trained and they've worked with a lot of people, because of course the human body is a human body, right? We're not dealing with test numbers. We're dealing with human bodies that are quite fickle and they have a way of doing their own thing. So you just want to make sure that you're working with someone who is experienced, at least has a number of years of experience working with multiple women who, they prescribe bioidenticals to, so that they can really help you, because you can experience symptoms, right? So you might have too much of one hormone and it might be showing up as a problem. Like you might have hair growth, for instance, extra hair growth, and that never happened before. So your testosterone that you've been prescribed might be too high. So you really have to work with someone who can recognize those symptoms and adjust dosages as needed.
I think you've largely already addressed this, but is there anything else for our attendee that asks, is there anything else we can do to plan for perimenopause and menopause in order to have easier shifts on our body?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I love that it was asked. And like I was saying earlier, when we start to think of the menstrual continuum, so to speak, that's really where I think that we need to put our effort and our focus. Because if we're thinking of it like that, we're not just thinking, I'm 24 and I'm invincible, then, we're able to see the bigger picture and the long-term strategy. So if we can really focus on, just taking care of ourselves. I mean, like, I don't expect people to, not go out and drink or, eat sugar every now and again and do those kinds of things because life. But at the same time, like, I really think that if we can practice a very basic 80-20 rule and, live our lives and have joy in it, but find joy in other things rather than, crazy partying and drinking and binging on cookies or whatever, we're going to preserve our menstrual cycle health, our fertility, long into our 40s, because we are able to, we're supporting our menstrual cycle function for the most part. And when we're doing that with the right nutrients and not exposing ourselves to too many toxins and taking care of our gut health and our thyroid and our adrenals and our livers, miracles can happen. Like I said, I know multiple women who have, gone into perimenopause and into menopause, and they've kind of sailed right through because they've just recognized, in their 20s and 30s that they need to take care of themselves for the long term. And that's really all it takes. Like, it doesn't take a lot. And I think also too, just to speak to something that I think we as women tend to struggle with, is having boundaries, being able to say no to things, not burning yourself out, being a yes person and, living up to other people's ideals or standards or requests. I think that is a huge part of taking care of our hormonal health. So big.
It's interesting. I'm reflecting back to what you said early on in the conversation, is that our hormonal health reflects our general health. And it sounds like what you're saying that is consistent with that in both directions. It's bidirectional, that taking care of our hormonal health is also the standard processes we'd use to be healthy, to live healthy lives, to eat healthy, to take care of our stress.
So true. I love that. Yeah, no, it is bidirectional. I love that. It's true.
That's great. So in some ways that's really encouraging, because it means that there's a lot that we can already do, that we already know, that we can already implement without too much complication. But that if someone did want to have a guide or some support, can you talk about a little bit about the type of work you do and what kind of services you offer?
Yeah, of course. So like I was saying, I'm a women's health coach, and, my goal is to kind of work with you in conjunction with your doctor, for instance, where I help you implement what is being recommended. And we really look at your menstrual cycle again as this barometer, as this map or roadmap for your overall health. And I will take what you tell me are your symptoms and help you figure out what the cause is. And then we work sort of from the ground up to address those issues. And so I have a program called Fix Your Period, and that's really what I do in the program. I told you I've been writing this book for this last year. So I haven't been seeing clients one-on-one, but I'm now back to seeing clients one-on-one and in small groups. And so it's one of those things where we have to have somebody to help us, because it's a lot of feeling around in the dark, which is what I did for a really long time. And so I highly recommend that. And you can find me at my website. It's NicoleJardim.com. Like I said, I have programs. I have a blog that is really in depth. I also have a podcast called The Period Party. And I also have my book coming out in April, and that's called Fix Your Period. And that's got the 6-week protocol in there.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Well, if our attendees don't have any other questions, I'm just going to say thank you so much for being here, for sharing this such important information. Is there anything else that you think that needs to be addressed, or that could be a reminder that maybe I didn't think, or our attendees didn't think to ask you? Is there anything else that comes to mind?
I just think ultimately that if we can, really get to the point where we're collecting data on our bodies and really understanding, what it is that your body is saying to you, because she's speaking to you pretty much every day. We just don't really know how to interpret her language. And so if we get to tracking our cycles and interpreting what our bodies are telling us every day, it's going to just have such profound effects on our overall health and our long-term health.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lisa.
I want to say thank you so much to all of our attendees for being here. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions. And I want to remind you that you can join us again next week for episode number 3, which is called Sex Without Babies: New Questions of Reproductive Intent from When to How, with Dr. Ruchi Puri. So we'll be talking more about it, almost like a continuation from today's show. So please do join us again next week. You can register on the same Zoom webinar link, and look forward to seeing you next week again.
Thank you.
What is reverence? It's a way of living in awe and amazement at these outrageous, complex, and beautiful bodies. The mere fact that we are alive at all, and to treat ourselves, each other, and the earth as if it was all a treasure, because it is. Be assured that anytime you feel small or contracted, there's a lie involved, because the truth of you is perfect nature, perfect wholeness, always more than enough. The stories we learn from family and culture, from thousands of years of culture, have often made the feminine less than, subject to, denigrated, or demeaned, and we leave those stories in the past. We don't pass them on to our daughters and granddaughters. Knowing our worth, we step forward into this new moment, knowing that all of the world is a blend of male and female, and each element asks for celebration. So we shine out and make a world that works for all women everywhere, starting with ourselves. Thank you for joining us at Women's Wisdom by Rosebud Woman. For more information and past episodes, visit us at www.rosewoman.com.